Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and joining me tonight is David Siegel. He is the CEO of Meetup. You may well know Meetup.com, which is now 20 years old. He's now the author of a brand new book called Decide and Conquer, 44 Decisions That Will Make or Break All Leaders. Welcome, David, to the show.
Thank you. There's a lot of pressure because I just heard this is the 709th episode of the show. So let's make this like one of the best of the 709. Let's do it.
Absolutely, we're going to do it. And so Meetup.com has an interesting history because it started 20 years ago in the aftermath of 9/11 when its founder, Scott Heiferman, decided that people really needed to connect and have community in person. And so that was sort of the foundation of Meetup.com, which I am a member of Meetup.com. I have been to meetups, but it has an interesting history how you came to be at Meetup and replaced the founder. In fact, the book starts out with the story of your early career and how, well, I'll let you explain it, but it's gripping right from the first pages of the book. It's gripping how you describe how you came to Meetup.
Okay, so I guess this is what happened. I was the CEO of Investopedia prior, and without me even knowing it, Investopedia was owned by IAC, which is Barry Diller's company, a big publicly traded company. And IAC decided to sell Investopedia without me even knowing it as a CEO. And they told me, and they thought I'd be ecstatic because get some financial gain from it. And that was my end of my time. And I was just in shock. And I did not want to start going back to work. I want to take 3 months off, 6 months off, decompress from the time. And suddenly I get a call from one of the board members of WeWork. His name is Michael Eisenberg, who he previously was a board member when I was the president of Seeking Alpha prior. So he knew me from that. And he said, David, I have a great adventure for you. I'm like, what's the adventure? He said, to become the first outside CEO of Meetup and to work for Adam Newman. And I said, well, I think the word crazy is appropriate probably when it comes to that opportunity. And I met Adam. We had a number of very interesting interviews, which I could certainly go into detail on if you'd like. And after 27 interviews, I finally was given the job to become the CEO of Meetup. And that's right, 27 interviews. And a lot of times they say you could learn a lot about marriage from your dating. You could learn a lot about what it's like to work in a company from the interview process. And there was so much dysfunctionality at WeWork during this interview process and dysfunctionality at Meetup during the process. I probably should have known a little bit better, but I'm still glad it worked out.
So 26 interviews and you finally had enough, which is interesting because I want to point out that your book is about leadership skills and you have 44 lessons. And the lessons, I love the format of the book, number one, because it's easily digestible, the points that you're trying to make, but they don't interrupt the flow of your story. And it's the story that's so interesting. I was saying to you earlier, it's like Homer's Odyssey. It's like this epic journey you took, and there were these lessons that came out of it, but it really flows very well. I thought the book was just full of tension and cliffhangers and plot twists. And so for a lot of people who don't know who Adam Newman was, and I really didn't know that much about him either until I read your book, and I'm like, oh my goodness gracious. I mean, I knew there was a lot of turmoil at WeWork, but I had no idea really until I read your book what it was. But you finally drew a line in the sand and said, I'm not going to this lunch. I think it was a lunch, and you're like, I'm not going. And then they made you the offer.
Right.
And so that to me was one of the first important lessons.
Yeah, you got to draw a line because it was actually a dinner with the entire management team of Meetup. After 27 interviews, the CEO said, even though we met once and we met a second time and spent an entire day together and met a third time, I still want to make sure that everyone feels really good about things. There's a certain way of leading through democracy as opposed to leading with real decision making that is certainly endemic in many leaders who want to be nice and thoughtful, but ultimately it doesn't work. And he said, let's go out for dinner and spend 3 or 4 hours meeting all your future colleagues. And I said, no, line is drawn. I'm done. Either give me an offer or I'm going to move on to something else. And then that's when I got the offer. Correct. Sometimes you just have to do that. And sometimes I like to say in sales, for example, the goal isn't to get to yes. The goal is to get to resolution. If the answer is a no, that's perfectly fine because it keeps you from wasting many months on something that may not ever come to fruition. Get to resolution, don't necessarily get to yes. And the resolution may not be good, but the worst thing is just being stuck in this in-between zone. It's like when making decisions, the worst decision is not to make any decision. It's probably oftentimes better to make a bad decision than no decision. That actually comes from Teddy Roosevelt, who said, the best decisions are great decisions, next best decisions are are bad decisions, and the worst decision is no decision. So
and no decision is a decision. And believe me, I've lived with that. It's called passive aggressive, but that's a whole other story. So your background right out of college was in human resources, which I found interesting because you mentioned in the book that a lot of CEOs and titans of industry didn't actually come through the HR channel. I spent 7.5 years in HR myself. And it's interesting the perspective that it gives you with your employees. In layoffs is one of the things you talk about in the book, and the fact that you wanted to treat people with dignity and respect, and the fact that one of the principal core tenets of your life is be kind. And I, relative to what you were just talking about, people would rather know than not know because ambiguity breeds anxiety and people just get mired to the point of paralysis and imagining all the horrible, horrible things that could happen. But do you think that your HR background really, gave you confidence in this arena to know that you were making the right decisions and how you did layoffs?
Beyond, I am so fortunate to have started my career in human resources. I remember I was an early employee at DoubleClick, which at the time in the late 90s was kind of one of the biggest internet advertising companies, ultimately acquired by Google for $3 billion. And I remember the CEO, Kevin Ryan, once saying to me, hey, David, the things that I focus on as a CEO are motivating people, hiring top talent, building the right organizational structure to enable effectiveness, having great clarity of communications and strategy. It's kind of the exact same things that you focus on in human resources. And I said, wow, you're right. Maybe I'll be a CEO one day. And that actually got me interested in going from human resources to a CEO because it's not really appreciated, but most of the things that CEOs spend their time on are people-related activities. And when it comes to layoffs, there's no more poignant time when a company can be in crisis, when a company has stress than during a layoff in terms from the people function. And to be able to work to mitigate that stress to the greatest extent possible is of paramount importance, not just to the people who are laid off, but to all the quote unquote survivors who are still there, who see how you treated their former colleagues and their friends, and to do the right thing by them. So for example, Catherine, a couple of things that we did that I mentioned in the book are, number one, when we laid people off, we actually had a couple of tech companies, heads of recruiting in the office. And we said, who told us that they are happy to meet with any person in the company who was let go. We wanted to make sure that every single person had a guaranteed interview and that they wouldn't be necessarily looking. And there were a few people that ended up getting hired from those, and everyone won because the new company won. People saw what we did and people really appreciated the fact that we made that effort. Another thing that we did, which isn't that common, but it's so easy to do, is we created like a big spreadsheet of every company that we knew, every manager, recruiter, human resources person that was looking to hire people, and put a spreadsheet with hundreds of contacts in there for anyone who was let go to get access to directly. And the important thing there is, again, for the people who are still at the company, they wanted to be able to help. They said, what can I do? And normally they can't do anything. Well, give them an action to actually do so that they can help out their colleagues and friends who had left. And the people who had left were able to tap into that feedback and it really helped them. So again, it's wins all around. So more companies should be focused on those things. And I think it's because when I was 24 years old, I once had to let go of 30 people in one day. So I think when you grow up with that, it helps you to kind of become a little bit stronger when it comes to that type of challenge in an organization?
Well, your book, like I said, is just full of tension and cliffhangers and plot twists and things you just don't expect, including the fact that almost from the beginning it was a crisis. You were hired, you were going to have an IPO. WeWork fell apart, and suddenly you went from we're going to have an IPO, no, it's canceled, to now we're going to be sold. We'd like to be sold, we'd like to sell you in like 2 weeks. I'm like, what? I'm like, and then the layoffs, and then looking for investors. And even for you, there is a bridge too far, because there are investors who came in and go, why'd you lay off 75 when you should have laid off 175? And you're like, no, that's a bridge too far. But I just can't believe how you kept going. You just kept going. Like I said, it's like Homer's Odyssey. It's
Well,
like
I think part of me I'm really focused on persevering and never feeling like I don't have agency. I think, there are two different types of people. Some people that tend to have an extreme external locus of control, meaning the things just happen to them and they can't necessarily control them. And there are people who overextend on the internal locus of control, like whatever I can impact, I want to be able to impact. And obviously the reality is that nothing's in your total internal control, and you can't probably impact more things than you realize. But generally speaking, I never want to wave the white flag. I just never want to say I give up. I always want to believe there's something else that I can do to help a person, to help a company. And in the book, like you said, I just kept fighting and fighting and never gave up. And it ended up, we got lucky and it ended up working out.
But as you point out, when you work hard, it's easier for luck to find you when you work really hard.
Yeah.
And you did a lot of things really well. Like when the company asked you to find an investor and you started calling everyone you knew, but in some ways the payback from them from doing that is that actually you did find an investor. But
Yes.
you also just had these relationships, which after the fact, you've been invited to the boards of so many things now. And so no effort, and this is when I mentor young people, no effort is ever wasted. Ever wasted. The point is to learn something. Take something away. It may not be what you intended, may not have been your goal, but you'll walk away and you will have learned something.
And it's action that matters. Like taking an action, meaning too often times people are like, I need to create the perfect resume. I'm going to spend thousands of hours on that resume. No. Get the resume to 1,000 people and spend like a little bit of time on the resume. And that's going to be a lot more impactful than, having that perfect resume. I want to have the perfect product and we're only going to launch our business once we have the perfect product. It's action that results in learning, as opposed to lots of introspection or lots of perseverating on, figuring out what one should do. The more you meet, and really comes down to meeting people. The more people that you meet, the more you ultimately end up learning. And just get out there and just meet as many different people. Say yes as often as you can. And you'll see, you don't even know why you're doing it, but you never know what's going to happen.
So this reminds me of LinkedIn, because when I first started, I was one of the first 500,000 people on LinkedIn back in 2005.
Wow.
And in your book, you mentioned something about looking somebody up on LinkedIn and they didn't have a profile. But there's a lot of, for instance, CEOs, back when I was consulting with all kinds of companies about how to use LinkedIn effectively, who didn't understand why they should be there. And I'm like, because you have thousands of relationships you've built in your career, and you have the ability to connect somebody you care about to the opportunity they want, and you are the person. But how does anybody know that if you're not out there for them to see it? And I shifted the paradigm, not from what you're going to get from LinkedIn, but what you're going to give. How generous can you be with relationships you already have? And so building and maintaining relationships in business, just like in any other facet of life, is so important. And people really need to think of relationship building and maintenance as an investment in the quality of your life, not just your career trajectory, but they are aligned.
The reminds me of the story at Meetup. I meet with a lot of organizers, and I met with an organizer, and he told me, I have to tell you this, David, we have 2 meetup groups. One meetup group that I'm organizer of is a bowling group, and because I love bowling. The other meetup group that I have is a career networking group, because I wanted to help to find a job. He's like, David, I got 2 of my last jobs from my bowling group. And I met my best friend at the career networking group. And it just speaks to exactly what we just talked about, which is that incredible overlap of the personal and professional. And that when you're going out and meeting people and you're quote unquote networking, which is this pejorative, so don't even think about networking, just call it like meeting people. When you're going out meeting people, you end up having these amazing life conversations. You end up potentially building personal relationships. And you know what? It could be incredibly enjoyable. The more that you think of networking as how can this person help me? Or how do I get a job because I just met this person? Like, it's a great way not to get a job. For example, they always say, like, when you're looking to every date to turn into marriage, like, it's never going to work out. But we just start going out with people, you'll be surprised, and you're not looking necessarily even to get married. Suddenly it works out. So I think that the larger point is that there is tremendous personal satisfaction. Forget business value. There's tons of that, but there's tremendous personal satisfaction that comes from meeting people, comes from building relationships and strengthening relationships. And too often people don't continue to keep that relationship going. There's one-time meeting and then it just kind of ends there. And little things like you said with LinkedIn, just liking a post or sending a message to someone that you just read something of theirs and it caused you to think about something else. It's so easy to do. Introducing 2 people to each other is like one of my favorite things in the world because it's so efficient to send an email to introducing 2 people. Both of them end up consistently appreciating it and everyone wins again. So people just don't necessarily aim to do those things, but it's just a great way to help people.
Well, and this comes from a place of generosity. And one of the things that struck me about your book was that you are a generous person by nature. And I think the 2 of us have a lot in common in that we are grounded in gratitude, which is, to me, the source of happiness is gratitude. But it's also generosity, because the more you give away, first of all, it feeds your soul to know that you've done something helpful. But it also comes back to you in 1,000 ways that you never expected by being a generous person.
And you don't do it for that reason. You do it because it's the right thing to do, but it just inevitably happens over and over again in my life. I'll be teaching a class and a student a year later or 5 years later will introduce me to this amazing podcast host named Catherine Reed. And suddenly we'll meet because of a student that happened to have taken my class. And that's a true story, of course, as we both know. You do good things, and whether it's karma or whatever, I think it's not just karma. I think you genuinely end up having good things happen to you because people want to be able to help someone who was helpful for them at one point in their life. And again, that's not the intention, but it ends up being a result. And I think people think too short-term oriented oftentimes about a very tactical kind of relationship.
You talk about transactional.
Exactly, yeah. A transactional relationship. And the goal is not to be transactional. And in fact, oftentimes I'm meeting with someone and they're like, and they're trying to help me. I'm like, I'm good. I'm like really a happy person doing really, all I want to do is find out what are the things that I could do, that Meetup can do, book, podcast, whatever it is, can do to help you. And then a great meeting for me is when I have like 3 homework assignments afterwards to do. And they're like, but wait, don't you want me to, how can I help you? I'm like, I'm good. Like, please, let me just help you. And I just really enjoy doing that.
Well, and it's interesting because these core values that are in your book also feed into the core mission of Meetup, which is the purpose of Meetup is to impact people's lives in a very positive way through community. And human beings are social animals. We're not meant to be isolated. Isolated human beings suffer physically and mentally because we belong in a community. And so it turns out that you're really well suited for this particular role because your organization reflects the core values that you live by.
Yeah, it's funny you say this. I was just having a meeting just an hour ago, literally with someone, and they said, "Should we go back to the office? Should we not come back to the office?" And I said, "No. We are a community platform. We are all about building community. We are not going to be like the shoemaker's children who goes barefoot. We need to be better at community than anyone else. That doesn't mean 5 days a week, but it means figuring out how people come to the office 1 or 2, whatever days a week, because we have to represent who we are. And at Meetup, we take our values incredibly seriously. One of our values is leading with integrity. And it's just disingenuous to be a community company and not really focus on building community for our organizers, for our members, for our employees, et cetera. And people know everything, and they know if there's words and actions are completely different, and everyone measures you on your actions. Your words are somewhat important in giving context for things, but it's your actions that mean absolutely everything.
Well, I have to say that you pivoted well during the pandemic. After you get through the first part of the book where so many things go so wrong so quickly, and then it's kind of like it looks like it's coming together, and then the pandemic, and you're like, holy cow, what else? But you have managed all of this incredibly well because you pivoted as everyone pivoted. And even though, and you mentioned this in your book, that Meetup was about meeting in real life, IRL, in real life. And that was kind of baked in, even though it was not explicitly stated that that's what the organization was about. But now all of a sudden you had to pivot, and there were silver linings to that. And at every organization I'm affiliated with, there were silver linings that we didn't expect, including more people having a greater geographic reach. You point out in the book, people from small towns that have fewer options for meetups suddenly had the world at their fingertips because of virtual. Talk a little bit about how you made that pivot and what your company has kind of learned from that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So the month that the company got sold was in March of 2020. Quite an interesting month in the world, because obviously that's when COVID hit. And we started seeing all of our events and RSVPs in China going down by like 95%. We're like, oh, things have happened in China. Unfortunately, swine flu and SARS and other things. And it's kind of been generally not came to the United States. And suddenly Italy, 95% of our events and RSVPs got canceled. And in Western Europe, we're like, okay, this is clearly real. And then Meetup, ironically, ended up with the second case of COVID in Mount Sinai Hospital was a Meetup employee. So we were one of the first companies to actually pull out of our offices. And that was hard because we're all about IRL. And then many of our employees said, well, we can't start doing global online Meetup events because we're IRL. And I basically got everyone together and I said, no, our mission is not IRL. Our mission is helping to keep people connected, full stop. And during this time of isolation, people need connections more than at any other time. We are going to, the first time in our 18-year history, allow groups who are only about getting together online. And we did that. The number one reason why a group got rejected, we rejected millions of dollars of groups we formed because it was online only. And it was the absolute best decision we ever made. We've had over 5 million online events in the last couple of years. There's millions of people who have said to us that Meetup was their lifeline during this particular time because they couldn't get together in person with people and they need a Meetup. And so many organizers, like you gave this the example, if I'm a parent of ADHD kids and I'm living in Albany, New York, which is a wonderful capital, but not a huge American city, and there's not that group, now I could tap into any of 100 other groups around the country that have that capability. I remember I met with a organizer of an ecstatic dance Meetup group. And she was an organizer in Kansas City, and they had like 4 or 5 people that used to show up in person, do ecstatic dancing together. She's like, David, there's like 30 people from 20 different countries, and I'll do all ecstatic dancing together, and then we hang out afterwards, and it's amazing. So there's all these amazing opportunities that have kind of come up that were really more serendipitous than strategic.
But
oftentimes, yeah.
But here's the strategic part. You realize unless you pivoted, you didn't have a company. So I sit on the board of Grand Involve. We put retired seniors, active older adults, into the classrooms of Title I elementary schools. And we came to the same conclusion. If we can't place our volunteers into classrooms, we don't have an organization. So we got these nice people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s to figure out Zoom and Blackboard and to be virtual volunteers in the classroom.
Not easy.
No, it wasn't. But we faced the same dilemma you did. Strategically speaking, you don't have an organization if you can't execute your core mission. In this case, it's community and connectedness.
Yeah, necessity isn't just the mother of invention, it's the mother, father, grandfather, great uncle, and great aunt of invention as well. And it really did help us, and it's helped many other companies as well.
But I also look at the accessibility factor of this too, because
Yes.
there's a lot of people. One of the things when we talk about children, for instance, there's a great gap in resources. And toward the latter part of your book, and we'll talk about that, there's a gap in resources. In kids who do not have transportation to stay after school for after school activities or come early in the morning, then they don't have the same opportunities as kids who just have transportation. Transportation is just a huge thing. And so with Meetup, having these virtual events meant that people who may or may not have gone in person to a Meetup event all of a sudden had the opportunity because things like getting there was not an issue. So do you look at accessibility as sort of this one of the silver linings of pivoting this way?
1,000%. So there's an organizer, his name is Edward Zia, and he speaks publicly about this. He was a homeless veteran in Australia, and he was always struggling with the fact that to get from some of the more remote areas in Australia to get into Sydney or Melbourne would cost people 20, 30, dollars each way, and people couldn't afford to come to events. And once he opened things up to online, the accessibility changed everything. And he personally ended up he didn't go to college. He got his personal education by going from one tech meetup event to another tech meetup to another tech meetup event. That's when he ended up finding his job. So he wanted to pay it forward and be as unselfish as he possibly could in helping others. He's devoted his life to this. And this opened up so many opportunities for anyone to be able to go to an event, from anywhere. And it's another huge silver lining. And again, the disparity of income and disparity of access is such an enormous problem in this country because we have Meetup events that help teach people tens of thousands of different, groups around languages, learning technology. And the best learning occurs in communities, best learning occurs from other people. So it really opens up opportunities for so many people. So it's something that I really wouldn't have thought enough about beforehand. I'm just really, really proud of now.
Well, I have to say, your book is also, dives deep into deciding what things need to be cut. Like not everybody's pet program, it might be a good idea, but if it doesn't drive growth or it doesn't drive revenue, then maybe we shouldn't have a bunch of employees working on it, which is just hardcore. I mean, that is business, right? But I think the way you explain it is so, speaking of accessible, it's so accessible for people who don't necessarily work in corporate America to understand that that's a reality.
It's the kindest thing you could do also for people because people work on projects and that aren't important to a company and they get demotivated and burnt out because the project never gets actually implemented. So instead, work on things that don't have an impact because everyone wants to have an impact in their work.
Absolutely.
And that's the goal.
And we're going to take a break and we're going to come back and discuss more of this with David Siegel, who is the CEO of Meetup.com and also the author of the book, Decide and Conquer. Join us after the break.
Caitlin, be serious. Now take the oath. Come on. I'm totally taking this seriously. Okay, I'm ready. You may begin. I pledge that I will never meet in person with anyone I first met online without checking with my parent or guardian. And furthermore, if my parent or guardian agrees to the meeting, it will be in a public place and my parent or guardian must come along. Do you pinky swear? I do.
When you teach your kids about internet safety, they'll pass it on. For more information, go to cableclicksmart.org.
If you smoked, this new lung cancer screening could save your life.
So how was work?
It was 1,300 hours. My math class from 302 was in the trenches. Davy Roth had it the worst. Fractions were coming at him left and right. He just didn't get the damn things. 2 days ago, I tried to teach him what 1/4 of 1/2 was using different sizes of blocks. Yesterday, I tried again by dividing up pizza. Both missions failed.
Oh no.
But today, I was ready. I created a combat math game where the only way to beat the enemy is to out-fraction them. Davy conquered every last denominator. My game was so successful, the principal is deploying it to math squadrons all over the school. Anywho, how was your day?
Oh, today my boss treated the office to salad wraps.
Salad wraps.
I know.
It's time to make an informed decision about COVID-19 vaccines. The dangerous new Delta variant is more than twice as contagious as the original virus. and can affect anyone. Right now, 9 out of 10 hospitalizations and deaths from COVID are among unvaccinated people. Getting vaccinated might save your life, and there's now an option that's fully approved by the FDA. Learn more at getvaccineanswers.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and tonight we're talking with David Siegel. He is the CEO of Meetup. He's also the author of a book, Decide and Conquer, 44 Decisions That Will Make or Break All Leaders. So, David, talking to you is something I could probably do for several more hours, but we don't have that much time. So I want to tease out some of the things that made a huge impact on me about your story. And one of them is your commitment. You know, you talk about a culture debt, you talk about a tech debt. By the way, tech debt is something I had never heard before, but I got it immediately what that is. But culture debt is also, you know, the culture of a place, what you inherited from stepping into something, you know, the founder had already built for 18 years. But one of the things you made a commitment to was diversity, bringing in women, bringing in people of color, because things don't generally change organically. It has to be intentional. And you kind of set that expectation right out of the gun.
Yeah, there wasn't a single person of color on the entire executive team when I first joined the company. We had 250 employees. We had a pretty diverse population, but at the highest level in the company, what we call our lead team, there wasn't anyone that was a person of color. And that's just a serious problem. It's a serious problem both because it's not the right thing to do. And it's also a serious business problem. Because the reality is that an enormous number of people who use our Meetup product are people of color, and we need to represent that, full stop. So it comes down to prioritizing it as a company, number one. Number two is it comes down to being comfortable taking longer to make hiring decisions. In the book, I talk a lot about how you need to make decisions speedily. And I think that's the case 95+ % of the time. But in the case of diverse hiring, ensuring that you have female leadership at the top, ensuring you have diverse candidates at the top, if you act too quickly, you will end up with the same types of candidates that many organizations end up unfortunately having, which is a tremendous number of white males kind of at the top. Ultimately, that does a disservice to the organization. And it certainly does a disservice to helping to mentor, you know, the people who are mid-levels in the company as well. And mentorship typically is best when there's alignment between executive teams and managers and employees. So we made it intentional. We slowed down how long it takes to hire certain people and promote people. And the results have been very, very positive. We have today, I would say that either close to half or half of our management of our leadership team is a person of color. And I think that's, you know, really important within a company. And over half of our leadership team is also women today.
You know, and there's a what I call a pipeline problem. Every time somebody's like, I sit on the board of a number of nonprofit organizations, and we're like, we need to diversify the board. Here's the issue. Most people recruit people to the board that they know. We talked about the power of relationships, building relationships, maintaining relationships, you know, but we tend to seek out people who are like us, and we tend to be in spaces with people like ourselves. So what ends up happening is you pull forward people that you know who are very similar to ourselves, and people who would like the opportunity are not being tapped. So all of us are looking, you know, I have one friend, Krista Jones, and she's a woman of color and she's so accomplished. But, you know, every time somebody needs somebody with experience, it's like, let's call Krista. Well, there's more than Krista, but you have to develop people, right? They don't just appear.
No, you have to make it a prioritization. That's what it comes down to. Agree.
So you teach at Columbia University, and I'm assuming at Columbia at this point, it's a very diverse population of students in your classroom, you know, and we have focused on the fact, the country, our culture is trying to focus on the fact that it's not a level playing field, and that Ivy League institutions, you know, governor schools, big issue down here. It's kind of like, how do we ensure that from the gifted programs in elementary school to the governor schools and high schools to the path to Ivy League schools, you have diversity? Because if you don't have diversity there, then we don't have diversity tracking the way you did into these great jobs right out of great colleges, right?
Yeah, it starts at an early age, and we need to be as cognizant we can at the earliest of ages, in high school days, elementary school days. Someone said to me, what can I do as a male, white male CEO? One of the things that I personally prioritize is I have a limited amount of time to mentor people. Mentorship is incredibly important. But if on LinkedIn, someone reaches out to me and they didn't go to the top school, they didn't come from the top place, and they say, hey, can I get your advice because I want to be a CEO sometime? I'm going to be much more open to taking that call and taking that meeting, because that person may not have as many people to be able to reach out to as others. And I think every person can figure out, if you're going to take 2, 3, or 4 meetings, a week or a month, with people that you don't know, just to help them figure out, how you prioritize and you level the playing field from that perspective as well.
And you mentioned that Meetup is used by people of color. And let's just talk a little bit about, when the founder took you around so that you could experience Meetup in person, and then he reported back that you were very Meetup-y. In every way, you were very Meetup-y. I thought, that's so okay. I get that. So and you do this, I know that you do this. So just describe a little bit about the diversity of the people who use Meetup. I mean, bowling and a career networking group, right? What other kind of dancing you told us about? Like,
one of my favorite stories. I told a friend that I was going to join Meetup, and he said, "Oh my gosh, I love going to Meetup groups." And I said, "Okay, what group do you go?" And he said, "I go to a watching horror flicks Meetup group, and then we all have dinner together." He said, "What I love about it so much is that there's people in their 20s and there's people in their 70s and even 80s in this Meetup group, and ageism is real, and stereotypes by seniors about people in about millennials, and they're millennials and Gen Zers, and perceptions by millennials and Gen Zers about seniors. It's just terrible, and it's rampant. And what this group does is, he said, most 20-year-olds and 50-year-olds don't necessarily have an opportunity to learn from and build relationships with 70 and 80-year-olds. And it's amazing to be able to do that. And what that does is it gets people to meet people who are different from themselves. And when you meet people who are different from you, it decreases ignorance, it builds relationship, people have an opportunity to get an education about people who are different, and great things happen. Because what happens at Meetup is you meet about something you're passionate about. It could be, hiking, but it could be like knitting, or it could be, any type of passion that someone has. But guess what? People from all races and religions and ages and ethnic backgrounds all may be passionate about something, and they get together, and then the barriers just break down, and they realize people are actually a lot more similar to each other. That's one of the reasons I'm so lucky, because I feel like Meetup directly decreases xenophobia and kind of hate, that exists, specifically because it gives people an opportunity to meet kind of in person around passions.
And this is what our country needs more of. We need more Meetup, because, as we were talking about, we tend to make friends with our neighbors or at our workplace,
who are just like us socioeconomically.
Who are just like us. But the bar to entry in Meetup is just, you have to show up.
That's it.
So the bar of entry for Meetup is you show up. Nobody excludes you. There's not a test. There's not like, well, let me see, fill out an application and we'll see if you can be in our Meetup. All you have to do is have a passion about something.
Yeah, 99% of our events are free. So you really just have to show up.
And this is how we kind of break down, it's not a secret that we're at a very divisive time in our country. And we spend way too much time on social media, which is not a good place, because it's not reality. So I give Meetup all the credibility in the world for saying you can't fake it when you're in person. It's not like being on Twitter or LinkedIn or any of the Instagram, my Instagrammable life. Meetup is like you show up and you bring yourself, and there you are.
And the best self that you bring is when you can be vulnerable and you could share what's going on in your life, and you could share your challenges going on. A friend of mine from a company about 10 years ago, she had breast cancer, and she made it her life goal to help to educate people around breast cancer. And how did she decide to do it? She said, okay, I could create a Facebook group and do it digitally. She said, no, I want to meet these women in person. So she has a Houston breast cancer support group, and it's not just like changing lives, it's literally saving the lives of dozens of women who have been a part of that group. And the amount of bonding and meaningful exchange that occurs when you're in person and you really get to know someone because you share your challenges and your struggles with family and health, etc. It's really it's life-changing for many people. So again, very lucky to be a part of it.
Well, I'm a Rotarian, and Rotary is a very old organization that was started by lots of older white men in business. And now it includes everybody, and it's also a global organization. And a lot of people misunderstand Rotary too. But the thing that has been, and I've been a Rotarian for 13 years, is once a week you sit down with people, and we have different political beliefs. We have a lot of different beliefs about everything. But you know something? When you have lunch with somebody every week for 13 years, you know them as people. They are your friends, and you find common values and you work on common things that make the world a better place. And so Meetup is sort of like that without all of the flag waving and pledges and the secret handshake stuff that goes with Rotary. So I want to talk a little bit about in the book you talk about not only did the pandemic throw you a curveball right at the moment when you're starting out on your own, having put together this investment group to buy Meetup from WeWork. But then Black Lives Matter happened. And then how you decided, and again, this is leadership. This is real leadership because, it starts at the top, how people are going to respond within an organization to something as dramatic as that.
Yeah, when George Floyd was murdered, we all were obviously beyond beside ourselves. And then we started looking at what was happening on Meetup, and we saw the Jacksonville Black Lives Matter group started, and the Kansas City Black Lives Matter group started, and the Michigan Black Lives Matter. Suddenly we started seeing like 50 within a span of just 1 or 2 days, 50 different groups all started related to Black Lives Matter. And I said, wait, we could help here. We could do something much, much, much bigger than just waiting for groups to start. How do we proactively reach out to every single person, frankly, in the world and tell them that normally it costs whatever it costs, $12, $15 per month to be a Meetup organizer. If you organize something around social justice, around racial equality, then it is free to be an organizer forever. And then we started seeing hundreds of other groups spring up to help to build community for people. Because again, much like you referenced at the beginning, we were built after 9/11 when our founder said it shouldn't take a tragedy to build community. And all too often, tragedy is the basis for community around 9/11. And it was also the basis for a lot of people needing to come together after George Floyd's murder. And we did that. And in addition to that, we did a whole lot of other things too, from banners throughout our site to direct as many different people as possible to creating social justice and racial equality works, groups, to galvanizing our organization to donate money towards causes that could help to support Black lives and people of color during this important time, to creating a series on something called Meetup Live, which we continue today. The key is, if you just do something like as a one-off when it's popular to do so, that's a real problem. And you see a lot of organizations, get on the bandwagon when there was anti people of color or anti-Asian hate and certain times, and then it suddenly becomes out of favor a month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months later, people kind of forget about it. And that's a serious problem. It's almost like when we talked about relationships, it's not about the one-time tactical action. It's about it persisting for a long time to come. So for 2 years, every single month, we have had a Meetup Live, which is our biggest meetup group that we control. Over 100,000 people are part of this big group, solely focused on an issue around racial equality and social justice. So we've continued it, and we will always continue it because it's a big part of what we do.
Well, you're right. I mean, suddenly we were talking about finding diverse people for boards and as employees and as executives, but diversity, equity, and inclusion is belatedly addressing that talent pipeline shortage. And I hope that doesn't fade away either. There's a lot of consultants that are very much in demand. Everybody's looking for a consultant to help with their DEI policy. And I hope it does continue, because I worry that, we had the civil rights movement, and then what happened? So we have to sustain it. And I think Meetup is one way. And you talk about empowerment in your book too. And then when it's time to direct and not just empower your employees, but by the same token, there's a time to empower people out there to paddle their own canoe on your platform and to keep this effort going.
Yeah, I mean, 'cause at the end of the day, Meetup succeeds and most platforms succeed because of the passion of the organizers. And our job is really just like a parent's job is to ultimately support and enable their kids to become the people that they want to become. The job of Meetup is to support our organizers, the people who are most passionate, the 300,000 plus people who really make things happen. And that's it. Listen and learn to what they most need, support them, and then good things will happen to the company. Like I like to talk about as a leader, I'm at the bottom of the organizational chart. My job is to support and enable the success of all of our leaders, and their job is to enable the success of their teams. Same thing with Meetup in terms of our platform. Our job is to enable the success of our organizers and kind of get out of their way and enable them to be, successful.
So you mentioned being a parent, tough job, toughest job ever. And this factors in your book. But it was important to me that you put it in your book about when you were working 16-hour days, and it was just crisis after crisis, and investor and meetings and all the things, that you had a commitment to your 15-year-old son to go to a Green Bay Packers game, and you had a commitment to visit your other son in Israel, and you were not going to cancel that. And I'm like, wow, okay, let's raise that up right this minute and talk about making decisions and looking at the impact in 5 days, 5 months, and 5 years, and your commitment to your family.
And your kids see that too. They know how hard you're working. They know that you're going through a lot. They know that I wasn't sleeping well at all. I would wake up in the middle of the night and I'd be on my couch for a few hours, just trying to have my head stop racing. And they saw, and everyone said to me, "You're obviously going to cancel your trip with this son. You're obviously going to cancel your family trip." And I'm like, absolutely not. Because at the end of the day, if you go away for 3 or 4 days, or you go away for a week, you have to recharge. You have to take care of yourself. And, the goal is not to live to work. It's the opposite, of course. And no matter how busy you are, when people say, "I don't have time," it's just almost never true. They're basically saying the statement, "I am not prioritizing this." And just like employees know everything, kids know everything. Kids see everything, especially during COVID when you're working home. They really see everything. And kids will see whether they're a priority in your life or whether they're not. And you're making that conscious choice. And it's important to understand that always.
I like the end of your book. Instead of acknowledgments, you call it gratitude. And I love that, because why acknowledgments anyway? That you made me think about, why do people call it acknowledgments? Like, I see you, you did something, I'm acknowledging you. I'm like, these people really did a lot for you. And you detail all the things these people did to support your book, and the editing and the reviewing and your students and all the people who gave you feedback. But at the very end, you thank your family. And at the very, 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 very end, you thank your wife. And, people don't work 16-hour days and have families and clean clothes and something in the refrigerator without having a partner who understands that it's a partnership. And talking about how you all have always found your houses was amazing too, because she's all in.
She's a go-getter. And the quick story on the house thing, it's just like, I have to briefly share it, is we've lived in 5 different houses or apartments our whole life. And there's not been a single time that house or apartment was on the market. Not once. My wife would go around sometimes, because she was very thoughtful about, from a sales mentality, with like our little daughter in a stroller, and leave notes underneath people's houses or apartments, and tell them how beautiful their house is, and would they be interested in, or do they know people that would be interested in selling the house to a nice family. But yeah, so many good things happen from being proactive.
And that is one of the tenets of your book. Be bold. And you use that to illustrate. Sometimes you just need to ask, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? Someone's going to tell you no.
Same thing as if you didn't ask, right?
Right. The same thing as if you didn't ask. And good things have come to you and your family because you live this tenet of being bold. But you also have the tenet of being kind, right? There's a lot of things in this book, and I encourage people to read it because it's not just nuggets of business wisdom, as your mother's friend pointed out. It's a life book. It's not a leadership book, it's a life book. And I would agree with her. It is about how you live your life at the office and at home and how you move through the world.
Yeah, who you are has to be consistent in all places. And if not, again, people always know. I was talking to my 18-year-old now son, and I said, who you are is how you act when no one's watching. And, as you think about it, as you grow older, think about what you're doing when no one's watching, because it's easy to be the good person when you're in school and everyone's watching, your teachers are watching, your friends are watching. How about when no one's watching? How about when you're walking across the street and you see an elderly person and no one would see you doing this? Are you helping that person across the street or are you not? And, originally, I haven't ever told people this, but the name of the book at one point in time was Luck is Hard Work. And the concept being that if you work hard by being bold, if you work hard by making quick decisions, if you work hard by being kind and being thoughtful, then lucky things will end up ultimately happening to you. And I think that's been a lot of the story of the book and also of life in general, that a lot of lucky things have happened to me, really, truly. But I think I've worked hard to put myself in a position such that lucky things end up just kind of happening to you. And I think when people will oftentimes say, how come this doesn't happen? That could, there are things that you could literally do to create positive things to happen. And I think you listed out a couple of those.
Well, it's interesting to me too, because the way you live your life, I love the analogy of what do you do when no one's watching, because I do think that's important. But our kids in school are not being educated necessarily this way. We talked before about kids who have more advantages and fewer advantages, but it's all about not failing. You're like, you should fail. This is what, you don't learn anything from being successful. You learn from failing. So fail a lot, you learn a lot,
Yes.
But children are not taught that. They're taught
It's terrible. It's terrible.
But it's true.
I know, but it's absolutely true in that really there's such a fear of mistakes and there's a fear of failure and anxiety that people have that they're going to mess up and they're not going to get a good grade and then they're not going to get into a good college and then the life is over. I mean, it's just so detrimental. I think one of the things I like that sometimes teachers do, and I do this as a professor, is their bottom grade doesn't count. The worst grade they get on a test, removed. Find ways, little ways of letting people fail, little ways of letting people learn from experiences so that they can ultimately not fear as much. Because if you want to have, an amazing life, sometimes you got to take risks. But if you're afraid of taking risks because you're afraid of failing, then you're afraid that fear will end up resulting in not having these amazing things potentially happen to you as well. In the book I talked about, I don't know, I'm sure you read this part, but at one point I permanently made all my hair purple.
Yes.
And for 4 months, I walked around with purple hair. And and that was a bold move, especially as a CEO of a company, as a father. My kids are a little bit mortified. But I did that partially because there was so much unhappiness that was happening in the world. I just wanted to have so many people, anytime they bump into me, just like kind of laugh and kind of just smile and kind of make not being the normal thing be more normalized for people.
You also talk in the book that the regrets that people have in life is not that they failed, but all the things they never tried.
Yeah.
And, and I think that's the other thing, that young people are so afraid that life is a graded assignment. And I tell people all the time, I'm like, life is not a graded assignment. It doesn't matter. So you fail, you'll do something else. I'm working with a couple of very young candidates who are running for city council. Very young candidates running for city. And I'm about getting women elected and getting young people elected. So they come to me and I'm like, yes, I will stand with you and I will be with you, because the biggest fear, especially for women candidates, has always been that they'll be left out there alone by themselves with no support network, right? And they will fail and it will be terrible. But what I said to one of these young candidates, I'm like, you're either going to win or you're going to learn. You're going to win or you're going to learn. So either way, you win, right? Because you will learn something by running for office, whether you win a seat or you don't. You will make connections. People will know who you are. You'll change the conversation. You will change the conversation that some of these older council members have been having that maybe aren't of your generation. You will make an impact.
And it's a process. It takes multiple elections over multiple time, and the electorate hears those messages, and then finally it happens. And maybe that takes a half a century. I hope it doesn't. And sometimes it takes a decade, and sometimes it happens faster. The key is to always appreciate I'm a step in that process.
And iterative. You talk about that in your book too. You talk about the fact that it's not about big wins. People seem to think that success falls out of the sky like a bomb dropping.
Because they read these things about Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, and they said, and Steve Jobs, and there's this cult of the CEO and this cult of like success, and people think that that's the way like things actually happen in business or in life, and it doesn't. Or maybe it does. Someone wins a lottery, which, by the way, could be the worst thing to happen to someone.
That's true.
Actually, most lottery winners are proven to be, a decade later, far less happy than they were prior to winning the lottery. That's the opposite of the mistake, right? And most people that will make mistakes and that will have failures, end up just saying, thank God I had that when the stakes were lower.
Right.
Because sometimes the stakes get higher and then it's harder to have those mistakes. So bring it on in your teenage years, bring it on in your 20s, because the stakes are still lower at that time.
And I have to believe that that's one of the reasons that draws you to teaching at Columbia University is there's an energy that you get from young people, from their optimism, from having it all out in front of them, from knowing that you can make a difference in how they see the world. It is a very energizing sort of thing. I want to thank you, David, for being on the show. I love your book so much, and I hope people will read Decide and Conquer, because it is a life book, not just a leadership book. And for those of you who want to see past episodes of Inside Scoop, you can find about 12 years worth on YouTube at YouTube Inside Scoop TV show. Thanks so much, David. Thank all of you for watching. This has been a pleasure.
So much fun. Thank you.
And that's it for Inside Scoop. Join us on Mondays at 8 p.m. here on Channel 10.